Carl G. Vaught's article, The Identity of Indiscernibles and the Concept of Substance, from 1968 in the Southern Journal of Philosophy. Now, if you're not already familiar with Castor and Pollux and the thought experiment surrounding them, and with bundle theory, and with Leibniz law, and with PII, or the principle of the identity of indiscernibles, you need to become familiar with them, or this video won't make a lick of sense. You want to rewind and watch the videos on the articles playlist on this particular YouTube channel, on Max Black's article, The Identity of Indiscernibles, and on John O'Leary Hawthorne's article, The Bundle Theory of Substance and the Identity of Indiscernibles. Now, Carl Vaught is giving us a third way of looking at these matters. On a personal note, before going any further, I'll mention that I had the privilege of meeting Carl Vaught before he died, and I only had 2 conversations with him, and I think very highly of him. He was a wonderful human being and a wonderful philosopher. And in one of these conversations, Carl Vaught advised me, little old me, who had at the time no interest in studying Leibniz, he advised me that I should read Leibniz because Leibniz is a genius, and he's right. And part of what he's doing in this article is just that. He's reading Leibniz and taking Leibniz seriously. Now, there's more than this, but there are at least 3 major ways of considering the case of Castor and Pollux. We can consider first the Humean way. John O'Leary Hawthorne represents the Humean tradition. This is the bundle theory tradition. And in this theory we say that Castor and Pollux are actually the same, or at least that's John O'Leary Hawthorne's account. Castor and Pollux are the same, and bundle theory is correct, and PII is correct. And what Castor and Pollux is just a set of properties. There is no substance or essence underlying the properties. Now, according to an alternative way, which we could call the Lockean way, Castor and Pollux do have a substance or an essence underlying the properties. There is a Castor over here which has the properties which we associate with Castor, such as being spherical and so on. And there is a Pollux over here that has the properties we associate with Pollux, being spherical and so on. These substances or essences underlie the properties of the spheres, and they are distinct spheres because Castor has its own essence and Pollux has its own essence, or Castor has its own substance, Pollux has its own substance. But the substance itself is not something we can actually perceive directly. We can only perceive the properties. And so we can't actually see any difference between them. We have difficulty even thinking of it. In the world in which Castor and Pollux are, we're told that there's no distinction between the properties of Castor and Pollux. We're told that they don't actually have the names Castor and Pollux. And if we try to suggest, well, you can add a third object to the world, you can add an observer, and he can look at Castor and Pollux and say, there's a sphere to my left, there's a sphere to my right. I named this one Castor, I named that one Pollux. And we're told that when we imagine this, we're not looking at the world in which Castor and Pollux actually are. And what we're doing is we're introducing properties they don't have, by which we are not able to distinguish Castor and Pollux because they don't actually have those properties. We're stuck knowing they're 2 distinct things, knowing there is a substance or an essence underlying the properties, but not being able to think of the substance. And this is somewhat like Locke. This is resembling Locke's view that substance is the inconceivable, unknowable, imperceivable reality which underlies the properties of an object. My whiteboard marker here has a substance underlying its properties. It has all its properties, like being more than 3 centimeters in length and being less than 10 kilograms in weight. It has all these properties, the property of having a blue cap. But the marker itself underlies the properties according to the Lockean view, and it's not something we can directly perceive. We only know it through its properties, and it's at least possible that we don't know the substance at all, as with Castor and Pollux, where we can't distinguish them by their substances. We just know that they are distinct. So that's the Lockean way, and then we have the Humean way. O'Leary Hawthorne and any other contemporary defender of bundle theory from the Castor and Pollux counterexample will fall into the Humean tradition. Max Black falls into this tradition, which we can at least compare to Locke in some respects. And so do those who follow Black, like any number of metaphysicians who follow Black. I believe Richard Swinburne is one of them, and I think Robert Adams is another, and there are others. Now, Karl Vaught represents another way, which we could call the Leibnizian way. Karl Vaught reminds us in this article that, first of all, that in Leibniz, PII and Leibniz law are not separate. They go together, and we would like for them to go together. It'd be very convenient if they did. Consider the fact that Leibniz law tells us if any x has a property which y does not have, then x is not identical to y. Wouldn't it be convenient if we could just say that that never produces any false negatives? There are no false positives, because everyone knows Leibniz law is correct when it says if x has a property y does not have, x is not identical to y. There are no false positives. But what if there were no false negatives? If it were never the case that x and y lack any distinction in properties and also lack an identity? That would be nice. And Vaught says in Leibniz the two go together in interest of parsimony. Remember, parsimony is one of the rules of good metaphysics. Now, as Vaught explains Leibniz, Leibniz is committed to PII in interest of parsimony. Take two things, Castor and Pollux, or any other two things, and if they are indiscernible with respect to their properties, why would we say that they are numerically different? You know, here's Vaught. To regard this x and this y, as distinct things having all the same properties, quoting Vaught, is to introduce a set of differences which make no difference for either conceptual thought or action. To introduce a set of differences which make no difference. Vaught is following Leibniz in saying that a difference in substance or a difference in essence should make a difference. There should be a relevant conceptual difference if there's a difference in substance. There should be a relevant practical difference if there's a difference in substance, or if there's a difference in essence. Substance should not be what Locke thought it was. Substance should not be what Berkeley critiqued as Locke's view of the inconceivable somewhat. If there is a substance and there is an essence, it ought to be something we can think of. It ought to be something we can know about. Now, if you consider the case of Castor and Pollux, and you consider how we talk about them, how we think about them, how they're written about first in Max Black's dialogue, and also in other articles dealing with the same counterexample, you find very quickly that there's a constant effort to introduce some property by which they can be distinguished. And there's a constant response from the Max Black position, the position of B from his article, character B. The constant response is they don't have these properties. You want to introduce the Starship Enterprise and say that Captain Picard is left of one sphere and right of another, and that's how you can imagine them as separate. Well, the Starship Enterprise is not in this world that I'm describing. Well, we would like to be able to conceive of these essences as distinct. We would like to be able not just to say that these essences are distinct, but to conceive of the difference, to conceive of the difference in essence. The difference in essence, or the difference in substance, should make a difference conceptually. And so the Max Black tradition, which resembles Locke in these respects, insists that the difference cannot make a difference. And essentially what we're dealing with here, every time we try to introduce a relation to a nearby possible world in which a third object is introduced and Castor is to one side of it and Pollux is to the other side, or some other way of distinguishing them, like even naming them Castor and Pollux. If we want to introduce a world, a nearby possible world in which one of them actually is named Castor and Pollux, it's not just a fantasy that one is named Castor or Pollux. When we introduce these nearby possible worlds as a way of considering Castor and Pollux, as a way of visualizing Castor and Pollux as distinct spheres, what we're doing is we're considering their essential properties. Alfred Plantinga has been useful in his metaphysical books, his metaphysical writings, particularly the book The Nature of Necessity, in explaining how what he calls world-indexed properties are essential properties. A world-indexed property is the property of having some other property in some other nearby possible world. So in some nearby possible world, instead of being a philosopher, maybe I was a dentist. And in this world, I have the property of being a dentist in another world. And what that means is just that the possibility of being a dentist was open to me. And what that means is that I have an essence. There are some things I could be and some things I could not be. And my essence limits the scope of my possibilities. All my possibilities and only my possibilities are contained within my essence. So when you describe the possible properties of a thing, what you're doing is you're describing its essence. When you describe the world index properties in Plantinga's terms, when you describe the properties a thing has in some other possible world, you are describing the essence of the thing. And in this Leibnizian way that Karl Vaught wants us to consider, we would be able to know, to conceive of the essences. And if we're thinking like Vaught, we might conclude that that nearby possible world in which, using the Enterprise because I like Star Trek, that nearby possible world in which the Enterprise comes to visit Castor and Pollux, and one sphere is to the left of the Enterprise and the other is to the right. Here they have distinct properties of being left of Enterprise or right of Enterprise. Well, in the world in which they are, they have the properties of being left of Enterprise and right of Enterprise in that other world. And these are their possibilities. These are the possibilities that are contained within their essence. And when we consider those possibilities, we are considering the essences. Now, I was going to explain this a while ago and I must have gotten sidetracked. The people in the Max Black tradition say that essential properties don't count. There's a tendency in the literature in the Max Black tradition that's more Lockean to say that PII doesn't count if you allow essential properties to count. But the thing is, essential properties seem to count for Leibniz law. If they can count for Leibniz law, it really seems like they ought to be able to count for PII. And if you don't know why I say they count for Leibniz law, or if you don't agree, just consider this one thing. What does Descartes do? When Descartes argues for the difference between the distinction between mind and brain, or between person and body, what does he say? He says the person could exist without the body. The mind could exist without the brain, but the body cannot exist without the body. The brain cannot exist without the brain. And what that means, one has a property the other does not have. And it is an essential property. It is part of the essence of mind that it could exist apart from brain. It's part of the essence of the person that it could exist apart from the body. But that is not part of the essence of the body or the essence of the brain. What we're doing here is we are distinguishing these two things by their essences. And Leibniz law works that way. And if Leibniz law can work that way, so can PII. This, at least, is the sort of reflection that goes along with Vaught's way. Vaught's third way, the more Leibnizian way, in which we get to say, PII is true, but bundle theory is false. And to make it work, to fill in all the details, you just need to consider ways in which essence is thinkable, or substance is thinkable. Not the inconceivable somewhat of John Locke, but ways in which a difference in identity, a difference in substance, or a difference in essence makes a difference. Karl Vaught, 1968, The Identity of Indiscernibles and the Concept of Substance, a third way of looking at Castor and Pollux.